morning. Today we are continuing on with chapter 11. Yesterday we started off learning about the flour milling. Let's first, before we start on our information, let's go over our key terms. Our first key term is industrialization. What is industrialization, Finn?
The process of developing large-scale mechanical factories.
So it's the process of making those mechanical factories, the big factories, not the small little town. Yes, Nolan? So it's not the small things, it's the big factories. What is an industry, Maddie?
A specific branch of business which produces a certain product
or service. So it's a specific branch of the business. So when we look at the title of our chapter, it's flour, lumber, iron, those are specific branches. So those are each an industry. Who is an industrialist, Zoe? An owner or manager of a large business. Remember, IST means it's a person, and we see it starts with that industrial. So an industrialist has to do with the industry. They own a large factory. It's part of that industry. What does it mean to invest, Will?
Put money into something offering potential profit.
Yeah, you're putting money into something that's offering you potential profit. You're investing your money in hopes to get a lot more money out of it. What is a bushel? Naomi?
A unit of measurement for agricultural crops that equals 1.25.
A unit of measurement for agricultural crops. So we don't use a bushel when we're talking about how long our yard is. Okay, we wouldn't call it a bushel. It's the cubic feet, 1.25 cubic feet. So we use cubes when we're talking about volume. So those of us who think about math, sometimes we talk about the volume of something. That's when we're cubing it, length times width times height. So I talked yesterday about how sometimes we use a bushel when we're at the apple orchard and you're filling up that basket. They have one basket is equal to one bushel, 1.25 cubic feet. So the bushel is specifically for crops, for when you're growing stuff. Maddie?
Would you, for if it were wheat or grain, would you use the term bushel if it's when it's fine, grind it into flour, or when it's the grain?
Just the grains of wheat you would use as a bushel. When it's put into the flour, when it's actually ground down, that's when we use the weight. How much does it weigh? It weighs a pound. Okay, so once it's made into the flour, then we switch over to the weight. So if you look at a flour package, it'll have the weight on it. And our last one, iron ore. Cool.
Rock or a mineral from which iron can be removed.
Yep. So it's that rock or mineral. The iron ore is what we find out in nature. It's that rock, that mineral, that you can take the iron out of it. Very good. All right, so yesterday we read most of the flour. Today we're going to finish up with the flour industry. So we are on page 223, the people of the flour industry. The flour milling industry relied on the labor of many different types of workers. Farmers, railroad workers, machinists, barrel makers, and mill workers all played essential roles in the production of flour. Charles Pillsbury and the other Minneapolis flour mill owners employed thousands of men and women to turn wheat into flour. The jobs they performed ranged from unskilled to highly skilled. The highest paid workers tended the huge machines at the mills. Their jobs required the most skill and were also the most dangerous. Many lost an arm or a hand in the big machines. So when something gets stuck, they would just stick their hand in there to clean it out. And then when it gets unstuck, it starts moving again. And they could accidentally lose their hand or their arm. So it was very dangerous. So do you think they get paid the most or the least?
The most. No, the most.
The most, because they had to be the most skilled. Remember, it's that human capital. The more skill you have, the more you get paid. So they're getting paid more. It's more dangerous, so they get paid more. Katie?
Couldn't they stick something besides their hand into the machines?
They could, but it's not as easy to pull something out with a broomstick than with your hand that you can grab it. So was it the best way for them to clean the machines? No. But did they do it out of trying to be quick? Yep. So as time went on, things got better. So we have better ways of cleaning stuff now. We have better equipment to use to help us, so we have less of those kind of accidents. They were just learning these big machines, so they had to figure it out. Jocelyn.
When you said like the machines could like crush their hands, I immediately thought of, I know a lot of people know this show, Squid Game. Because there was a scene where this person had to get something out, or like, and then their hand got immediately stuck in it.
Mm-hmm.
It was gross.
Yes. So it happens in real life, so it definitely happens in movies and TV shows. Maddie.
If only there were grabbers back then.
Yeah. And why do you think they developed those? Because they wanted to save people's hands. Leah.
Why did they just like turn the machine off and not
Because sometimes it's a lot of work to shut something down and then to turn it back on. Or if the machine had stopped working because something was stuck, they might not have realized that it's going to start up as quickly as it did. There's lots of things. It was a learning process. So if it's your first time working on a machine, you might not understand certain things. We learn from experience. We learn from mistakes that were made. And things are better now than what they were then because we've learned from those mistakes. Nolan.
Yeah, what you were talking about with the machines that could accidentally cut off your hand. It reminds me of Saul when they had they had to like try and grab their hand and grab the antidote and their hand might cut.
Yes. Like I said, it happens in real life, so it happens in movies and TV shows. So the highest paid workers, the packers who caught the flour in barrels and bags as it poured off the assembly lines were among the lowest paid workers in the mills. So these are the people that just stood there with the bags as it's pouring down and they caught it. Does it take a lot of skill to stand there with the bag? No. It could be heavy. So remember what we learned about that human capital though. Having muscles doesn't get you paid more. Those voyagers, thinking back a few chapters, the voyagers weren't the highest paid, but they had to have the biggest muscle because they were rowing their canoes everywhere. So they had to be strong, but you don't need a lot of skill. So the jobs that you don't need a lot of skill for, you don't get paid a lot. So were the workers who nailed the flour barrels shut and who swept the floor. The unskilled jobs were not only low wage, but also boring and repetitive. So if you're catching the grain as it's coming down, that's all you're doing. You're holding your hands up, catching the grain, putting that bag down, grabbing another one, holding it up for 8 hours. Yeah.
Easy.
Oh yeah. Well, usually you get like a lunch break.
Well, you can talk. They're probably.
Yeah, but if there's nobody around you and the machines are super loud, so yeah, pretty boring. So not only do you not get paid a lot, it's not fun, but are you getting some money? Yeah. So is it worth it? Is it better than having zero money? Yeah. So sometimes when you don't have the skill, you have to put up with the boring. You have to put up the repetitive. And you think to yourself, wow, this is really not fun. I need to get more skills. I need to build up my human capital so I can get a better job so I'm not as bored. I can make more money. These jobs offered little chance of moving up to better paying jobs. If workers wanted to earn more, they would have to improve their human capital by learning new skills. By 1880, Charles Pillsbury, his fellow mill owners, and their workers had turned Minneapolis into the nation's leading flour producer. As production and profit increased, large milling companies began buying up small milling companies. By 1890, 4 corporations, or very large companies, accounted for 87% of the city's flour production. Of those 4 corporations, C.A. Pillsbury and Company was the largest. So remember, when he was 27, he came and he bought that failing mill and said, I have a dream. I want to make a big business. I want to grow it into the big industry. Did he accomplish his dream?
Yes.
Yes, he did. So just because people tell you, oh, don't do that. Oh, he's, we pity him because he's just going to fail like all the others have failed. Did he listen to them?
No.
No. So just because people are saying, oh, it's not going to work, if you have faith in yourself and you have a plan, try it. Go for it. And you could end up like Charles Pillsbury, becoming this big industrialist. So you could do it. If you have a plan of where you want to get, don't let other people stop you. I was just talking to my sister-in-law the other day, and my nephew is really wanting to apply to Georgetown. And he actually had a teacher at his school say, no, they won't accept you, don't apply. And I said, that is the worst thing you could say. He gets very good grades. He's scoring really high on his tests. Always, always, always try. Okay, there's nothing wrong with trying. Don't let people tell you you can't do something. Have faith in yourself. All right, moving on to our next industry. Frederick Weyerhauser and the lumber industry. Frederick Weyerhauser was already a rich and successful businessman by the time he invested in Minnesota's lumber industry. Weyerhauser had grown up in Germany and immigrated to the United States in 1852 at the age of 18. So these people move around when they're quite young. Mateo's 18. I can't imagine him going to another country by himself and becoming this big industrialist. But you have to have faith in yourself, confidence, and you can do it. After working for several years in a series of jobs, he and a partner risked almost all the money they had to buy a sawmill in Illinois. That sawmill was the first piece of a lumber empire that eventually spread across much of the northwestern United States. So just like we learned about with the land speculators, it's a risk. You put your money into something hoping to get a big return. Buying the sawmill, Charles Pillsbury buying the mill, it's a risk. And you have to be able to take that risk. They risked all of their money. And they wanted to have that plan in place to make it pay off so they could get large profit. Finn?
Oh, I just wanted you to pick on me.
When I'm recording, I do the reading. So Weyerhauser realized early on that a successful lumber business depended on a reliable supply of logs. He also realized that the best way to make sure the logs kept coming was to own the forests that produced the logs. In the 1860s, he started buying timberland in Wisconsin. When most of the white pine there had been harvested, he turned his attention to Minnesota. So think about what you know about cutting down trees, that deforestation. What happened in Wisconsin? Why did he have to come to Minnesota? He ran out of trees. He cut them all down. Is that a good thing?
No.
What should you do, Paisley?
Protect some of the trees and leave some of them
To repopulate? Sometimes it's not just leaving some. What else could you do, Charlotte?
Oh,
Plant new trees. So when you're cutting down some trees, you plant new trees. It does take a while for those trees to grow big and tall. So you might want to rotate. I'm going to cut down this section and plant new trees. And then I'll cut down this section and plant new trees. So you're going to want to rotate where you're cutting because we don't want to lose all the trees. Hello? Okay. Nope, she needs it for this afternoon, so I'll send her down in a little bit. Thanks. Bye. Okay, so he was cutting down all the trees and not replacing them. So he's just moving from forest to forest. Not the best way to go. Now, 150 years later, we know better. So now we know when we cut something down, we plant new. So we don't lose all of our trees. So if we look at our picture, you can see all of that green are the pine trees that Minnesota had in 1830. So remember, he didn't immigrate until 1852. So this is before he was cutting down all the trees. Look at all of that green in Minnesota. Now let's turn the page to 226. Look at what he's doing to a lot of the forests. Oh boy. In 1890, Weyerhauser and his partners purchased more than 200,000 acres of timberland in the central part of the state. He eventually expanded his business in Minnesota to sawmills and small railroad lines. This gave him power over every step of the lumbering process, so he could tightly control costs and profits. So not only did he own the trees, because he owned the land that the trees grew on, he owned the sawmill, and he owned the railroad tracks that he's sending those trees on. So it's not like the farmers that were the railroads, they had to fight to get them regulated so they couldn't up the prices. He owned the railroad. So he wasn't being charged too much for using the railroad tracks. So he was very smart, making sure that he owned every step along the way so nobody could gouge him in prices. By 1900, more than 400 lumber companies, including several belonging to Weyerhauser, were operating in the state, and Minnesota ranked third in the nation in lumber production. Towns and cities throughout the Midwest were built using Minnesota lumber. So because he owned those railroad tracks, he could send his lumber out to other people. So it helped him save money and it helped him raise his profits. Lumber industry essentials. I think we're going to start this. I don't know if we'll finish it. We're a little bit ahead of schedule with where I thought we would be. So we're going to go a little bit more into the lumber. The lumber industry relied on the same basic essentials as the flour industry. Investment from business owners such as Weyerhauser was combined with natural resources, machines, and people. Though logging in Minnesota had begun in the late 1830s, it wasn't until the 1880s that lumber companies started making major investments to cut down trees and produce lumber on a large scale. So natural resources. For hundreds of years, vast forests of white pine, a tree prized for its high-quality lumber, grew in dense stands across much of northern Minnesota. Remember, it was these pine forests that the Ojibwe would move to in the wintertime. So that's where the deer were. So that's helped seclude them from the blizzards and big snowstorms. The white pine could grow more than 150 feet tall, and the straight trunks had no branches for many feet above the ground. These straight, strong trees made superior boards for construction. So they didn't have to cut off all of the branches, and they could just make these big, strong boards out of their trunks. Rivers and waterfalls were just as important to the lumber industry as they were to the flour milling industry. Rivers served as transportation highways for millions of logs. When they reached the sawmills, the floating logs were collected into a boom. A boom is a section of river that was blocked off to contain the logs. So they would literally just float the logs down the river. So they wouldn't be having to put them onto ships. They could just put them, the big logs, they just put in the water, and the current floats them down to where the sawmill is. And then where the sawmill is, they push them off to the side into like a side reservoir. They called it a boom. And it was just like a holding place where the logs would just float in that pool until they were able to take them out and cut them up. So there, inside the boom, workers sorted and stored the logs. Like the flour mills, sawmills were located next to waterfalls, so they could use that water power to operate the machinery. So those saws that were cutting, they didn't want to have to cut all of those logs by hand. They want the machines so they're cut quickly and evenly. Jocelyn.
I remember when I went to this place, it's kind of near a lake I went to. It was like, they showed us like how the lumberjacks, like where they slept many years ago, and you could tell it was old just by the way it smelled. And then there was like this horse, like a place for horses. And then there was like piles and piles of logs. And then there was this area where you could sit on a log and watch them like show you how they did it with the horses pulling the logs. So they put the log on this like carriage thing made out of wood, and then they'd have the horses, they'd attach the horses to this thing, I don't know, but then the horses would pull it.
Okay. So they would kind of harness the horse up and connect it to where the logs are, and the horses would pull those logs. Because remember, these pine trees are super strong, they're also super heavy. So it's not like one person can pick up a log and carry it to the river. So they would have the horses pull it from where they cut it down over to the river, and then they would roll it into the river to float down to the sawmill. So that makes perfect sense that a horse can pull a whole lot more than people can carry. Tristan.
So one time when I went to somewhere, I don't remember where I was going, but when I got there, there was a sawmill that wasn't really that old.
Okay.
And the people that worked there showed us how the lumberjacks back then did it. And there was a little small scale model of how it worked, little buttons with attached to lights. And then I knew how hard they had to work to actually make the boards.
Yep. It was a lot of work. Lumberjacks, it's a hard working business. That's another one where you need a lot of the muscle, but you don't necessarily need a lot of skill. Okay, to operate the saw, you just have to saw back and forth, and just know where to cut it so it doesn't fall on top of you, right? So it wasn't a ton of skill needed. Now that they have more machines to cut them down, there is more skill that gets involved in it, but you have to grow your human capital so you can get the higher paying jobs. But just like in the flour mills, there were the low paying wages where the people didn't make a lot of money because they didn't need the skill. Same thing with the lumberjacks, cutting down those logs. And at the sawmills, there are some jobs that you need more skill for and some jobs that you need less skill. We're going to read more about that tomorrow. So for my friends listening at home, we hope you are well, and we hope to see you soon. Have a wonderful day.